Hello, Pisces. Something in you already knows a shift is coming, not a small one, not another ordinary week blending into the next. I'm talking about the kind of shift that changes how you carry yourself, how you feel walking into a room, how your whole life starts to feel different, almost unrecognizable compared to where you've been standing lately. That's what this title is speaking to, and I think you clicked on it because some part of you is ready for exactly that. Let's take a breath together before we start, because this reading deserves your full attention, not a distracted glance while you're doing something else. I want to clarify something right away, because I don't want you walking into this expecting a physical transformation or some external makeover. When I say glow up, I'm not talking about how you look. I'm talking about something deeper, an internal shift so significant that it changes the energy you carry, and that shift in energy ends up reshaping how your life unfolds around you. That's the real transformation I'm sensing here. And honestly, it's a far more lasting kind of change than anything purely external could ever be. I want you to think for a moment about how you've been feeling lately, underneath the surface, separate from whatever you show the world day to day. Have you felt a little dimmer than usual, a little smaller, a little more muted in your own presence? Maybe you've caught yourself shrinking in certain situations, holding back opinions you'd normally share, dimming your natural energy to avoid taking up too much space. If that resonates, I want you to know this reading is speaking directly to that experience. Because what I'm sensing building for you right now is the opposite of that. A return, a reclaiming of the fuller, brighter version of yourself that's been quietly waiting underneath whatever dimmed version you've been presenting lately. Have you already felt a flicker of that brighter energy trying to return? Maybe a moment recently where you felt more like yourself than you have in a while, even briefly. I'd love to know in the comments, because what's building for you feels significant, and I want to see how many of you are already sensing it. Let's talk about why this shift feels like it's arriving now specifically. I sense that you've been going through a quieter, more contracted period, not necessarily a dramatic crisis, but a stretch where you've been more cautious, more reserved, more focused on just getting through each day rather than actually living fully within it. That kind of contraction often happens for good reasons. Protecting yourself during a harder season, conserving energy while you dealt with something difficult, staying small because it felt safer than taking up your full space. But contraction, even necessary contraction, isn't meant to be permanent. And I sense that whatever period required you to pull inward is coming to a close now, making room for genuine expansion again. I want to talk about what this expansion might actually feel like as it begins, because I think recognizing it in real time matters more than waiting for some dramatic external sign. It often starts subtly, as a shift in energy rather than circumstance. You might notice yourself standing up a little straighter without consciously deciding to. Speaking a little more directly in conversations instead of hedging everything you say. Laughing more easily, more genuinely, instead of performing a smaller, more careful version of humor. These small shifts in how you carry yourself are often the earliest signs that this larger transformation is beginning to take hold. I want to be clear about something important here, because I don't want this reading to feel like empty hype, disconnected from your actual life. This isn't about pretending everything is suddenly perfect or forcing positivity you don't genuinely feel. It's about something more honest than that. A genuine return of energy and confidence that's been building quietly beneath the surface, finally becoming visible in how you move through your days. Let's talk about what's been happening underneath the surface that's led you to this point, because I don't think this shift is happening randomly or out of nowhere. I sense you've been doing real internal work, even if it hasn't always felt like work in an obvious, structured sense. processing something difficult, reflecting on patterns you're ready to release, slowly, quietly building the self-awareness that's now allowing this brighter energy to finally break through to the surface. I want you to think about what's changed in how you see yourself over the past several months, even if the change has been gradual and hard to pinpoint. Are there beliefs about yourself you've started questioning, ways of thinking that used to feel absolute but now feel more flexible? That internal shift is often the real engine behind an external transformation, like the one I'm sensing building for you. The outer glow-up, whatever specific form it takes, is really just a reflection of an inner one that's already well underway. Let's walk through some of what I'm sensing about how this transformation unfolds, because I think having a general shape to watch for will help you recognize it more clearly as your own life starts to shift. The first phase feels like a quiet reawakening, a return of energy and motivation you might not have felt in a while, interests you'd let go of resurfacing, a renewed desire to take care of yourself, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. A sense of curiosity about your own life returning after what might have felt like a period of just going through the motions. The second phase feels like visible momentum. This is where the changes start becoming noticeable, not just to you, but to people around you. You might find yourself making decisions more confidently, setting boundaries you wouldn't have set before, pursuing things you would have previously talked yourself out of. People in your life might comment on a shift they're noticing, even if they can't quite put their finger on exactly what's different. The third phase feels like full integration, where this new energy stops feeling like a temporary spike and starts feeling like your genuine, sustained way of being. This is where the overnight framing of the title becomes less literal and more emotional. It's not that everything changes in one single night, but rather that there's often a specific moment, a specific realization or decision where you can feel the shift crystallize, even though the full unfolding continues to develop over the following weeks and months. I want to slow down and talk more about the buildup itself, because understanding how this tends to unfold will help you recognize it more clearly as it happens in your own life, rather than only noticing it after the fact, once the transformation has already taken hold. Shifts like this rarely arrive as a single, isolated event completely disconnected from everything before it. They build gradually, in layers, even when the final realization or catalyst moment feels sudden. The earliest layer often shows up as a kind of restlessness, a subtle discomfort with the smaller, more contracted version of yourself you've grown used to being. If you've felt an increasing itch lately, a sense of wanting more from your days without being able to fully articulate what that more actually means, that restlessness is often the very first sign that this larger transformation is beginning to stir beneath the surface. The next layer tends to bring small moments of reclaiming, brief instances where you catch a glimpse of your brighter, more confident self breaking through, even if it doesn't feel consistent yet. A moment where you spoke up more directly than usual. A decision made from genuine desire rather than obligation. A flash of the old, more vibrant version of yourself showing up unexpectedly in the middle of an otherwise ordinary day. These moments matter more than they might seem in isolation, because together they form the early pattern of the larger shift building toward full expression. I want to go a bit deeper into what led to this contraction in the first place, because I think understanding the why helps make sense of the transformation that's now unfolding. Often, we dim our own energy for genuinely protective reasons, not out of weakness, but out of necessity, given whatever circumstances we were navigating. Maybe you were protecting yourself from criticism by making yourself less visible. Maybe you were conserving limited emotional energy during a stressful period by pulling back from situations that would have required more of you than you had available to give. Maybe you were simply exhausted, and dimming your presence felt like the only sustainable way to keep functioning day to day. Whatever the specific reason, I want you to recognize that this contraction served a purpose. It wasn't a failure or a step backward. It was your system doing exactly what it needed to do to protect and sustain you through a harder chapter. And now, as that harder chapter eases, your energy is naturally beginning to expand again, the way it's designed to do once the protective need for contraction has passed. I want to mention something about the specific catalyst that might trigger this shift for you, because I sense there being a particular moment, conversation, or realization that acts as a kind of turning point, even though the full unfolding continues developing gradually afterward. This catalyst might come through something someone says to you, an experience that shifts your perspective, or simply an internal moment of clarity that arrives seemingly out of nowhere, though really it's been building beneath the surface all along. Pay attention to moments over the coming days that feel unusually significant, even if you can't immediately explain why. That significance is often a sign you're encountering this catalyst moment as it happens. I want to talk about confidence for a moment because I sense it's at the heart of what's shifting for you. Not the performative kind of confidence that's really just bravado covering insecurity underneath, but something quieter and more genuine, a settled sense of trust in yourself that doesn't need external validation to feel real. I sense you moving toward that kind of grounded confidence, the kind that doesn't require constant reassurance, because it comes from an internal place rather than depending on how others respond to you. I want to bring up something symbolic that came through while preparing for this reading. I keep sensing the image of a window being thrown open after being kept shut for a long time. Fresh air and light flooding into a room that had grown a little stale and dim. That feels connected to the energy shift you're moving into, a sense of freshness returning to areas of your life that have felt closed off or muted for a while. I'm also sensing the image of someone stepping out from under a shadow into direct sunlight, that brief moment of adjustment as your eyes take a second to acclimate to the brightness before you can fully see clearly. That feels connected to how this transformation might initially feel a little disorienting, even though it's entirely positive, simply because it's such a contrast from the more subdued energy you've grown used to carrying. And I keep returning to the image of a plant that's been kept indoors, finally getting moved outside into direct sun, growing more vibrantly than it ever could in its previous, more sheltered environment. That feels like a direct reflection of you right now, someone who's been surviving in more sheltered, cautious conditions, about to be given the right environment to actually thrive rather than just get by. I want to bring up a few more symbolic impressions here, expanding beyond what I mentioned earlier. I keep sensing the image of a chrysalis opening, not because I want to lean on an overused metaphor, but because something about the timing feels specific here, that particular moment where the transformation inside has already fully happened, and what remains is simply the emergence becoming visible to the outside world. If you've felt like you've been doing quiet internal work for a while without much external evidence of it yet, that emergence, that visible moment, feels close. I'm also sensing the image of a fire that's been carefully tended, kept small and controlled, being finally allowed to grow into its full size. That feels connected to the sense of energy you've been keeping deliberately contained, perhaps out of caution or necessity, now being given permission to burn as brightly as it actually wants to. And there's a recurring impression of a mirror, specifically the experience of looking into one and genuinely liking, even being surprised by, what you see reflected back, not in a vain or superficial sense, but in the sense of recognizing yourself fully, energy and all, in a way that feels unfamiliar simply because it's been a while since you've felt that fully aligned with your own reflection. I want to spend some time now talking about the internal narrative shift that tends to accompany a transformation like this one, because I think it's one of the more significant, if less visible, aspects of what's unfolding for you. For a while, you might have been carrying an internal story about yourself that emphasized struggle, smallness, or difficulty, a narrative shaped by whatever circumstances led to this period of contraction. As this shift takes hold, I sense that narrative beginning to update, not through forced positive thinking, but through genuine, accumulated evidence of your own capability and resilience becoming undeniable. This narrative shift matters because the story we carry about ourselves shapes so much of how we move through the world, what we believe is possible for us, what we're willing to attempt, how we respond to setbacks. As your internal narrative shifts from one centered on struggle toward one that includes genuine confidence and possibility, I sense that shift influencing far more than just your mood. It influences the actual trajectory of your choices and opportunities going forward. I want to touch on something about self-compassion here too, because I think it plays an important supporting role in this transformation actually taking hold rather than fading after an initial burst of energy. As you move through this expansion, there will likely still be difficult days, moments of doubt, instances where the old, more contracted patterns try to resurface. I want to encourage you to meet those moments with compassion rather than frustration or self-criticism. Transformation isn't usually a straight, uninterrupted upward line. It's more like a general upward trend with natural fluctuations along the way, and treating yourself gently during the harder moments actually supports the overall trajectory more than expecting flawless, constant progress would. Let's talk about specific areas of your life where I sense this shift showing up most clearly, because I don't want to leave this too abstract without grounding it in practical terms. I sense your relationships being affected significantly. As your energy shifts, the people around you respond to that shift too. Some relationships might deepen, drawn closer by the more authentic, energized version of you that's emerging. Others might naturally fall away, relationships that were only sustained by the smaller, more contracted version of yourself you've been carrying. This isn't necessarily dramatic or conflict-driven. Sometimes it's simply a quiet drifting, a natural sorting that happens as your energy changes and you find yourself drawn toward different kinds of connections than before. I also sense your relationship with yourself shifting significantly, maybe even more than your relationships with others. A kinder internal voice replacing a harsher, more critical one. More self-compassion during difficult moments instead of immediate self-blame. A greater willingness to advocate for your own needs instead of automatically prioritizing everyone else's comfort over your own. On the practical side, I sense new opportunities becoming more visible and accessible, not necessarily because circumstances outside of you have changed, but because your own energy and confidence make you more likely to notice and pursue opportunities you might have previously overlooked or talked yourself out of. Confidence has a way of expanding what feels possible, and I sense that expansion beginning to unfold clearly for you. I want to address something important here, because I think it's easy to hear overnight glow up and imagine something purely external, a physical transformation focused on appearance. I want to gently redirect that expectation, because while it's true that people sometimes notice a change in how someone looks when their internal energy shifts, that's really a byproduct of the deeper transformation, not the actual point of it. Confidence changes posture. Genuine happiness changes the quality of someone's smile and the light in their eyes. Reduced stress often shows up in someone's overall demeanor and presence. But none of that is about chasing a specific external appearance. It's simply what naturally happens when someone's internal energy shifts as significantly as what I'm sensing for you. I want to be honest about something else too. This kind of transformation, while genuinely exciting, isn't always entirely comfortable while it's happening. Growth and change, even positive change, often stir up some resistance, some discomfort, especially if you're used to a smaller, more contained version of yourself. You might notice some anxiety alongside the excitement, a sense of stepping into unfamiliar territory, even though that territory is ultimately good for you. I don't want that discomfort to make you doubt whether this transformation is real or worth pursuing. Growth often feels a little uncomfortable exactly because it's genuinely stretching you into something new. I want to mention something about how you might notice this shift showing up in your voice and communication style too, because I sense it being relevant here specifically. As confidence returns, people often notice a change in how they speak. Less hedging, less apologizing unnecessarily before sharing an opinion, a more direct and grounded way of expressing themselves. If you notice yourself communicating with a bit more clarity and directness over the coming days, that's a meaningful sign of this transformation actively unfolding, not something to second guess or feel self-conscious about. Let's talk about what might get in the way of this transformation fully taking hold, because I think it's worth naming honestly, rather than pretending the path forward is entirely smooth and effortless. Old patterns of self-doubt might try to resurface right as this brighter energy starts to emerge, almost like a final protest before losing their grip. You might catch yourself second-guessing this new confidence, wondering if it's sustainable, wondering if you're allowed to take up this much space in your own life. If that resistance shows up, I want you to recognize it for what it is, an old familiar pattern trying to reassert itself, not evidence that this transformation isn't real or lasting. I also want to mention something about the people around you during this shift, because not everyone in your life is necessarily going to respond positively to this transformation, at least not right away. Some people, even those who care about you, might feel a little unsettled by a more confident, more visible version of you, especially if they've grown comfortable with the smaller, more accommodating version they've known. I don't say this to discourage you from moving forward, but simply to prepare you honestly. The people who genuinely support your growth will adjust and celebrate alongside you. The relationships that struggle to accommodate this shift are likely relationships that needed you to stay small in order to feel comfortable, and that's worth noticing as your energy continues to expand. I want to talk about self-care here in a genuine, non-performative sense, because I sense it playing a real role in supporting this transformation. Not self-care as an aesthetic or a trend, but as actual attention to your physical, emotional, and mental well-being, getting enough rest, eating in a way that actually supports how you want to feel, rather than following any particular restrictive rule, moving your body in ways that feel good rather than punishing, spending time on activities that genuinely bring you joy, rather than ones you feel obligated to perform for others. This kind of authentic self-care tends to accelerate and support the kind of internal transformation I'm sensing building for you. I want to gently mention something important here too. If you've ever struggled with how you see your own body or felt pressure around your appearance, I don't want this reading to add to that pressure in any way. The transformation I'm describing has nothing to do with achieving a particular look or meeting some external standard. It's entirely about how you feel from the inside, your energy, your confidence, your sense of ease within yourself. However that shows up physically, if it shows up at all in a way you notice, is secondary and completely individual. Please don't take this reading as encouragement toward any restrictive or harmful behaviors around food, exercise, or appearance. That was never the point of what's shifting for you. I want to add a bit more to this, because I think it's genuinely important to be thorough here. This transformation is measured by how you feel, not by any external metric someone else could observe or judge from the outside. Two people could both be moving through exactly this kind of internal glow-up, and it could look completely different for each of them externally, because the point was never conformity to some shared external standard. The point is authenticity, alignment between how you feel internally and how freely you allow that feeling to be expressed. That's a deeply individual thing, and I want you to trust your own version of it fully, rather than measuring it against anyone else's, including any imagined external ideal. I want to talk a little more about how this shift might show up specifically in your work or professional life, because I sense it having real relevance there too, not just in personal relationships and self-perception. As your confidence returns, I sense you becoming more willing to advocate for yourself professionally. Whether that's asking for something you've been hesitant to request, pursuing an opportunity you would have previously talked yourself out of, or simply presenting your ideas and contributions with more visible confidence than you've allowed yourself recently. This shift doesn't require you to become someone entirely different at work. It simply allows the capable, confident version of you that's always been there to become more visible and active in how you show up professionally. I also want to mention something about creativity here, because I sense this transformation opening up creative energy that might have felt dormant during your more contracted period. If you used to enjoy creative pursuits, whether that's writing, art, music, cooking, or any other form of creative expression, and you felt disconnected from that side of yourself lately, I sense this shift reconnecting you with that creative energy. Creativity tends to require a certain amount of emotional safety and expansiveness to flow freely, and as your overall energy expands, that creative channel often naturally reopens alongside everything else. I want to bring up something about physical energy and vitality too, separate from appearance, because I think it's worth mentioning specifically. As this internal shift takes hold, many people notice an increase in actual physical energy, more motivation to move their bodies, better sleep, a general sense of vitality that had perhaps been muted during the more contracted period. This isn't about achieving any particular physical outcome. It's simply a natural byproduct of reduced stress and increased emotional alignment showing up in how your body feels day to day. I want to spend some time talking about the emotional journey that's led you to this point, because I don't think this transformation is happening in a vacuum, disconnected from whatever you've been through recently. I sense there's been real difficulty behind this contraction, whatever specifically caused you to dim your energy over recent months. Maybe disappointment. Maybe exhaustion from carrying too much for too long. Maybe simply the accumulated weight of everyday stress without enough space to recover and recharge properly. I want to honor that difficulty before we move further into the more hopeful parts of this reading, because I don't want to skip past how hard this period has actually been for you. Whatever led you to this more contracted, dimmer version of yourself made sense given what you were dealing with. It wasn't weakness. It was your system doing what it needed to do to get through something difficult. And now I sense that difficult stretch is easing, creating space for this brighter, more expansive energy to return. This isn't about erasing or dismissing what you've been through. It's about recognizing that you're moving into a new chapter, one where you no longer need to stay as guarded or contracted as you have been recently. I want to talk about trust here, because I think it's central to fully allowing this transformation to unfold. Trusting that you're allowed to take up more space, allowed to feel confident, allowed to let your energy expand fully without needing to shrink yourself to make others more comfortable. That kind of trust doesn't always come naturally, especially if you've spent a long time prioritizing everyone else's comfort over your own authentic expression. I sense this window inviting you to practice that trust, gently but consistently, as this new energy continues building. I want to touch on gratitude here too, because I think it plays a genuine role in fully receiving and sustaining this kind of transformation. Not forced positivity, not glossing over the difficulty of the period that preceded this shift, but honest acknowledgement of the growth and progress as it happens, rather than only recognizing it once everything feels completely, permanently transformed. If you notice small signs of this brighter energy returning over the coming days, even briefly, take a moment to actually register and appreciate them rather than dismissing them as insignificant or waiting for some larger, more dramatic confirmation before you allow yourself to feel encouraged. I want to talk about worthiness here too, because I sense it's relevant to how fully you'll be able to embrace this transformation once it takes hold. If some part of you has quietly wondered whether you deserve to feel this confident, this vibrant, this visible, I want to address that directly. You don't need to earn permission to take up space in your own life. That space was always yours. Whatever circumstances led you to contract and dim your energy don't reflect a lack of worthiness on your part. They simply reflected a difficult period that required a certain kind of self-protection. Now that period is easing, and you're allowed to expand back into your full self without needing to justify or earn that expansion. I want to mention something about how other people's reactions might affect you during this transformation, because I think it's worth addressing honestly. As you become more visible, more confident, more authentically yourself, you might encounter a range of reactions from people around you, some enthusiastic and supportive, others more mixed, or even subtly resistant. I want to encourage you not to let the less supportive reactions derail this transformation. Sometimes people's discomfort with your growth says more about their own relationship with visibility and confidence than it says anything meaningful about you or the validity of your own expansion. I want to bring up something practical here too. A few suggestions for how you might actively support this transformation as it unfolds. First, pay attention to the moments where you naturally feel more like yourself, more energized, more confident, and notice what conditions tend to create those moments. Whether it's certain people, certain activities, certain environments, understanding what supports your brighter energy helps you intentionally create more of those conditions going forward. Second, practice small acts of self-expression that might feel slightly outside your recent comfort zone. Speaking up a little more in conversations, trying something new you've been curious about, allowing yourself to be a bit more visible than you've grown used to being. These small practices help build the muscle of confidence gradually, making the larger transformation feel more sustainable rather than overwhelming. Third, be patient with any discomfort that arises during this process. Growth rarely feels entirely smooth, even when it's genuinely positive. Give yourself grace during moments of uncertainty or resistance, rather than expecting yourself to feel completely confident and comfortable throughout the entire process. I want to touch on something about the role that solitude might play during this transformation too, because I think it's worth mentioning, even though so much of what we've discussed involves other people. Some of the most significant internal shifts happen in quiet, solitary moments, time spent alone, reflecting, processing, or simply resting, without the influence of anyone else's opinions or expectations. If you find yourself drawn to more solitary time during this period, don't interpret that as a step backward or a sign of isolation. Sometimes genuine expansion requires quiet space to fully take root before it becomes ready to be shared and expressed more outwardly with others. I want to circle back to the relationships thread again, because I think it deserves a bit more attention. As you move through this transformation, I sense new people entering your orbit too. People who are drawn to this brighter, more authentic energy you're stepping into. These connections often feel different from relationships formed during a more contracted period, more mutual, more energizing, rather than depleting, built on genuine connection rather than accommodation or people-pleasing. I also want to mention something about existing relationships that do adjust well to this shift. Some people in your life are going to be genuinely thrilled to see this more vibrant version of you emerging. People who've perhaps missed this energy from you and are relieved to see it returning. Let yourself receive their support and enthusiasm fully, rather than downplaying this transformation out of habit or humility. I want to bring up something about boundaries here too, because I sense they play a real role in supporting and sustaining this transformation. As your energy expands and your confidence grows, you'll likely find yourself more willing and able to set boundaries you wouldn't have set during the more contracted period, whether that's around your time, your emotional energy, or how much of yourself you're willing to give to relationships or situations that don't genuinely nourish you. These boundaries aren't about becoming harsh or closed off. They're actually what allows the more open, authentic, energized version of you to be sustainable long term, rather than getting depleted again by the same patterns that contributed to your earlier contraction. I also want to mention something about comparison here, because I think it's worth addressing directly. As this transformation unfolds, it can be tempting to measure your own glow up against other people's, whether that's people you know personally or people you encounter online whose journeys seem more dramatic or more visible than your own. I want to gently discourage that comparison. Your transformation is shaped by your specific circumstances, your specific history, and your specific version of what genuine confidence and authenticity look like for you. It doesn't need to resemble anyone else's journey to be real, significant, or worth celebrating fully. I want to bring up something about celebration here too, because I think it's worth mentioning specifically. As you notice this transformation taking hold, I'd encourage you to actually celebrate it, rather than downplaying it out of habit, humility, or a lingering discomfort with being visible. You don't need to make a big public announcement if that doesn't feel authentic to you, but do take a moment, privately or with people close to you, to acknowledge how significant this shift genuinely is. You've done real work to get here, even if much of that work was quiet and internal, rather than something you could point to as an obvious accomplishment. I want to talk about timing here too, because I don't want you thinking this transformation has to happen in some rigid, specific time frame to be considered real or successful. While the title speaks to something feeling sudden, and I do sense a specific moment or realization that catalyzes this shift noticeably, the full unfolding tends to continue developing over weeks and months following that initial spark. Don't feel pressured to have everything transformed instantly. Trust the process as it continues to build, even after the most dramatic initial shift has already happened. I want to touch on something about the difference between confidence rooted in achievement versus confidence rooted in genuine self-acceptance, because I think it's a meaningful distinction as this transformation unfolds. Some kinds of confidence depend heavily on external accomplishments, needing constant proof of success or validation to feel secure. What I'm sensing building for you feels different, more rooted in simply accepting and valuing who you are, independent of specific achievements or outcomes. That kind of confidence tends to be far more stable and sustainable, because it doesn't require constant external reinforcement to remain intact. I want to mention something about how this shift might affect your relationship with rest and productivity too, because I sense a healthier balance emerging as part of this transformation. During periods of contraction, rest can sometimes feel like something you have to justify or earn, while productivity feels like the only acceptable way to spend your time and energy. I sense this shift bringing a more natural, less guilt-driven relationship with both, allowing genuine rest without needing to constantly prove your worth through output, while also allowing genuine, energized productivity when it feels aligned rather than forced or obligatory. I want to bring up something about joy here specifically, because I think it deserves its own mention, separate from confidence or energy more broadly. I sense a genuine return of joy, building for you, actual delight and pleasure in ordinary moments that might have felt flat or muted during your more contracted period. Small things beginning to feel genuinely enjoyable again, laughter coming more easily and authentically, a general sense of lightness returning to your everyday experience. That return of joy is, in many ways, one of the clearest signs that this transformation is genuinely taking hold, more reliable even than external markers of confidence or success. I want to address something about maintaining this energy once it arrives, because I think that's just as important as the initial transformation itself. Sometimes people experience a burst of confidence or motivation and then worry about it fading, returning to the more contracted version of themselves they're trying to move beyond. I want to reassure you that this transformation, while it might have moments of ebb and flow like anything else in life, is building on a genuine internal shift rather than just a temporary emotional high. That makes it more sustainable than a fleeting burst of motivation, something you can continue nurturing and building on rather than something you need to worry about losing entirely. I want to spend a little more time on this sustainability piece because I think it's genuinely important. What makes this transformation different from a temporary confidence boost is that it's rooted in real internal work, real processing of whatever led to the earlier contraction, rather than just circumstantial excitement that fades once the initial novelty wears off. This means that even on harder days, even during moments of doubt or setback, the underlying foundation of this shift remains intact. You might have days where the old, more contracted patterns feel more present than the newer, more expansive ones, and that's completely normal. It doesn't mean the transformation isn't real or lasting. It simply means you're human, moving through a genuine growth process rather than experiencing some flawless, uninterrupted upward trajectory. I want to mention something about how this transformation might continue to deepen over time, beyond just the initial period we've been discussing throughout this reading. Often, an initial shift, like the one I'm sensing for you, creates momentum that continues building well beyond the first few weeks or months. As you continue practicing this new, more confident way of being, it gradually becomes less effortful, less like something you're consciously working toward, and more like your natural, default way of moving through the world. That's really the end point of this kind of transformation. Not a single dramatic moment, but a sustained, integrated shift in who you are and how you show up day after day, without needing to actively think about it anymore. I also want to touch on something about identity here, because I think significant transformations like this one often require a bit of an adjustment period in terms of how you see yourself. If you've spent a long time identifying with the smaller, more contracted version of yourself, stepping fully into this brighter, more confident identity might feel slightly unfamiliar at first, even though it's ultimately more aligned with who you actually are underneath the contraction. Give yourself patience and grace during that adjustment period, rather than expecting yourself to feel completely natural and comfortable in this new identity immediately. I want to mention one more thing before we move into the final closing of this reading. Something about how this transformation might connect to your sense of purpose more broadly. As your energy expands and your confidence returns, I sense a clearer sense of direction becoming available to you too. Less confusion about what actually matters to you, less uncertainty about which paths align with your genuine values versus which ones you've been pursuing out of obligation or fear. That clarity often accompanies this kind of internal expansion, another meaningful byproduct of the deeper shift taking hold. I want to bring up something about the difference between short bursts of motivation and this kind of deeper, sustained transformation, because I think it's a distinction worth making clearly before we close. You've probably experienced brief bursts of confidence or motivation before, perhaps after a good week or a positive experience, only to find that energy fading once life's ordinary demands returned. I want to reassure you that what I'm sensing building for you now feels different from that pattern, rooted in something more foundational rather than circumstantial. This isn't dependent on everything in your life going perfectly. It's a shift in how you relate to yourself, which tends to be far more resilient to the ordinary ups and downs of daily life than a temporary mood boost ever could be. I want to mention something about how this transformation might show up in unexpected areas of your life too, places you might not have initially connected to this kind of internal shift. Sometimes people notice improvements in areas like their relationship with money, their physical health habits, or their overall sense of organization and follow-through. Not because those areas were the direct focus of the transformation, but because increased self-worth and confidence tend to ripple outward, touching nearly every area of life in some way. Stay open to noticing this shift showing up in places you might not have expected, rather than assuming it's limited only to the specific areas we've discussed most directly throughout this reading. I want to touch on trust one final time before we move into the closing summary, because I think it really is the thread running underneath everything we've explored today. Trusting that you're allowed to feel this good, this confident, this alive, without needing to earn it through struggle or constantly prove you deserve it, is honestly one of the more challenging shifts many people navigate in their lives. I sense you moving into that trust more fully now, and I think that alone is worth acknowledging as a genuinely significant accomplishment, regardless of anything else this transformation eventually brings. I want to bring everything we've discussed into one clear picture before we close. You're moving into a genuine period of expansion after what's likely been a more contracted, careful chapter. This isn't about external appearance or performing confidence for others. It's about a real internal shift, a return of energy, authenticity, and self-trust that's been quietly building beneath the surface and is now ready to become visible in how you move through your life. This shift touches your relationships, your sense of possibility, your relationship with yourself, and the overall quality of your daily experience, not through some external, superficial change, but through a genuine reclaiming of the brighter, fuller version of yourself. I don't think you found this reading by accident. I think some part of you has already sensed this shift building, even before you had clear evidence of it, and you were looking for a little confirmation that the brighter energy you've been quietly craving isn't out of reach. I hope this gave you exactly that. As we close, I want to leave you with this. Let yourself take up space again. Let yourself feel confident without needing to justify or minimize it. Let yourself be seen fully, rather than continuing to dim your energy to stay comfortable or accommodating. Whatever period required you to contract has served its purpose, and now it's time to expand again, gently but genuinely, into the fuller version of yourself that's been quietly waiting to return. If any part of this resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me if you've already noticed this shift beginning, even in small ways, or what part of your life you're most looking forward to seeing this brighter energy touch first. It genuinely means a lot to read through your comments and see how many of you are ready for this same kind of expansion. I try to read as many as I can, and it's always meaningful to see how many people are quietly carrying the same longing for this kind of genuine internal transformation. If you'd like more readings like this one, consider staying close by subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. And whatever this transformation brings you, I'll be here ready to walk through the next chapter with you whenever you're ready. There's something meaningful about being part of this particular stretch of your journey, even in this small way, and I genuinely don't take that lightly. Take care of yourself and get ready to shine a little brighter. You've done the quiet work. Now it's time to let it show. And however this transformation ultimately unfolds for you, whatever specific form it takes in your own life, I hope you remember this moment, right now, as the point where you first let yourself believe it was genuinely possible. That belief matters more than you might realize. It's often the very first step in any real, lasting change, the quiet decision to trust that the brighter version of yourself was always there, simply waiting for the right moment to fully step forward again.